Okay, today we are pulling back the curtain on one of the biggest, most persistent conspiracy theories of all time, the Illuminati. We're going to dig in and try to separate what's actual, documented history from the wild folklore that's been growing for, wow, over 200 years. I mean, it's the big question, right? The one that sits at the very heart of this entire legend. Is there some hidden hand out there, a shadowy group, pulling the strings and making decisions that affect every single one of us? For a lot of people, the answer to that question has a single, very ominous name. And at the core of it all is this one pretty terrifying idea, a new world order. The goal, supposedly, is to create a single authoritarian world government, all engineered behind the scenes for total and complete control. So how do people know this is happening? Well, they point to clues they believe are hidden in plain sight. Like the all-seeing eye on the US dollar bill, or symbols hidden in government buildings, maybe even in the logos of big global companies. For believers, these are like the secret language of the masterminds.
And this all feeds into that ultimate fear, that a tiny, secret group of elites has basically infiltrated the most powerful organizations on the planet to pull all the strings. But look, to really understand the myth, we have to go back and meet the real people behind the name.
Yeah, the true story, it doesn't start in Washington, D.C. or some New York boardroom. It actually starts in a small town in 18th century Bavaria, with a group whose real name and honestly their whole mission were completely different from the legend we know today.
So let me introduce you to the Order of Perfectibilists. That was their actual name. They were founded way back in 1776 by a university professor named Adam Weishaupt. And this was not some plot for world domination. It was a secret society born out of the Enlightenment, that whole movement that was all about reason, science, and individual rights.
And their goals, well, for the time, they were pretty radical. They wanted to replace what they saw as religious superstition with pure reason. They wanted to challenge the divine right of kings, this idea that monarchs were chosen by God. And they wanted to improve humanity through education. So why all the secrecy? Well, it was a couple of things. It was partly for security, to protect themselves from an oppressive government. And let's be honest, partly for what the source material calls the glamour of exclusivity. It made them seem cool and attracted influential members.
Okay, let's dive into this. Because for all the talk about a centuries-long conspiracy, the actual historical Illuminati, they didn't last long at all. I mean, it's kind of shocking. They're founded in 1776, and almost right away the government sees them as a huge threat. The ruler of Bavaria got spooked by their anti-monarchy ideas, the same kind of thinking that would soon kick off the French Revolution, and in 1784 he just banned all secret societies. By 1785, the whole thing was over. The order was finished, and its founder, Weishaupt, had to flee for his life.
But here's where the story takes a really strange turn. The official end of the Illuminati was actually just the beginning of their legend. It's almost as soon as they disappeared that they were transformed into, as one source puts it, the premier bogeymen of Europe. Suddenly, they were being blamed for every revolution and political shakeup on the continent.
The first really big accusation dropped in 1789. It came from an occultist who called himself Count Cagliostro. He gets arrested by the Inquisition, and under questioning, he confesses that the Illuminati, this group that was supposedly gone, were secretly plotting to take down the two most powerful institutions in Europe, the Catholic Church and the French monarchy.
Cagliostro's confession basically lit a match, and then two writers came along and poured gasoline all over it. First, in 1797, a guy named Abbe Barruel publishes a book claiming the entire French Revolution was a successful Illuminati plot. Then, just a year later, John Robinson's book, Proofs of a Conspiracy, argues the group had secretly taken over the Freemasons to destroy all of Europe's governments and religions. And just like that, the legend was born.
And from that point on, the myth just snowballed. I mean, once that foundation was laid, the conspiracy theory became incredibly adaptable. Every new generation just seemed to add its own fears into the mix.
What's really fascinating here is how the villain just changes with the times. In 1803, the conspiracy gets traced all the way back to the ancient Greeks. By 1924, a writer named Nesta Webster claims she could see their hidden hands behind the Russian Revolution. Then during the Cold War in America, the John Birch Society basically adopted it as conspiracy gospel, and today you often hear it framed as a satanic plot for a new world order. The bogeyman just keeps evolving.
So the way the theory goes today is that the Illuminati aren't acting alone. They supposedly sit at the very top of this pyramid of power, controlling a whole network of other powerful and secretive groups. Everything from college societies like Skull and Bones to elite global meetings like the Bilderberg Group, all of them supposedly working together to push this secret agenda.
So, you have to ask, what is the actual evidence for all of this? Well, historians and researchers point out a really consistent problem. The proof that's used to back up these claims is almost always, as one source perfectly describes it, specious or self-referential. So let's break down what that actually means.
This is a perfect example. Take the phrase Novus Ordo Seclorum on the US dollar bill. To a conspiracy theorist, this is a total smoking gun. It translates to New World Order, right? Well, no. Historians and linguists all agree the actual translation is New Order of the Ages, a motto chosen to celebrate America's fresh, new start back in 1776. The meaning is completely different, but you can see how the misinterpretation just fits the narrative perfectly.
So specious evidence is stuff that looks convincing on the surface but is actually false, like that dollar bill translation. And self-referential evidence, this is the real kicker. It's when theorists don't use real external facts. Instead, they just cite each other in this big closed loop. So Robeson makes a claim, then Webster cites Robeson, then a modern theorist cites Webster, and the chain just keeps going without ever touching verifiable historical proof.
And when you put it all side by side like this, the contrast is, well, it's pretty staggering. On one side, you've got the historical fact, a small, philosophical society that existed for a grand total of 9 years. And on the other, you have this massive, sprawling folklore that's been growing and changing for over 230 years, becoming the go-to villain for everything from real-world revolutions to pop culture thrillers.
And that really leaves us with one final question. Because even after you separate the fact from the folklore, the story is still incredibly powerful. You know, maybe it's because in a world that feels so complex and chaotic, the idea that there's a secret group pulling all the strings, well, it's a simple answer. It creates a sense of order out of the chaos. So the question is, why after all this time are we still so compelled to look for those hidden hands?